Okay, so in this video I'm going to cover a few things that were done off camera and some of the problems that I ran into while turboing the car, things I had to adjust at the last minute, and some issues with the ECU and tuning. I did this off camera, but I put this T in, go into the back of the block to relieve the crankcase pressure off the back. It was the little AN fitting adapter that I showed in probably the first video. Down here I had to buy this one coupler and this larger band. That was the only thing that did not come in the turbo kit, but it did come with the pre-bent intake tube. After my tuning day and my first drive, I lost one manifold bolt and several of them were backing out off of the stud, so I Loctited everything, and where I was able to, I put a lock nut. I was not able to put a lock nut here and here because, as you can see, it's notched, so the manifold has to be off and the body of this is just too big. Also, I left these in because after Loctiting them before I got the lock nuts, it was actually trying to pull the stud out. So now that everything's staying tight, I'm not too concerned. Everything's seeming good. My wastegate pipe came in. I just anti-seized the bolts just like I did the ones in the down pipe. There's a good shot of the down pipe. And I did get the exhaust hooked up under the car. Let me get under here and see if I can show you. So I'm running into one problem here. From right here at the V-band to after the cat, there's a small section of pipe. It's restricting the turbo. It's definitely not spooling as fast as it was with an open down pipe, which is obviously common. But what I've done is I've ordered 2 more V-bands. So I'm gonna cut right here. I have a section of pipe that's the same size as this, that's stainless steel. I'm gonna weld a V-band to both sides. So I'm gonna eliminate the cat, and it'll be a little bit larger pipe running all the way back to the muffler. But I am going to put a V-band on the other end of this cat pipe so that when it comes inspection time, even though it's a safety inspection, when they do lift the cars up and check them, I'll be able to put my cat back in so I have no problem passing emissions. I don't know if I covered it in any of my other videos, but originally I was going to keep AC. I had to pull that because I didn't want to route this through the hood. I do want to get another hood and route it through the hood at some point when I build the motor, but that's kind of irrelevant right now. We're actually transitioning into winter right now, and it's only about 60 degrees today, so super tolerable. The last issue I'm really having with the car right now is a high idle. This is kind of a special situation. In HTS you can set like a target idle, but ultimately when I swapped from the Y7 to the Y8 intake, I reused the Y7 throttle body and the Y7 intake air control valve here. A coolant tube passes through, which you can see I bypassed with a coupler, but a coolant tube runs through the ICV right here, and that's how it knows to like let air in and out of your throttle body. So if I was to pop this off, there's like literally a hole in the throttle body going down to the ICV. Well, over here, and by the way, when you swap to the Y8 intake, you have to change this little butterfly piece right here that controls the butterfly door, and I put the Y8 one and the Y8 spring on here. Also with the Y8 throttle cable, it's a little shorter, so it might be kind of hard to see, but that's the idle screw. So when I got back from being tuned, I was idling at about 1500 RPMs, and I went to adjust my throttle body screw, and I realized it wasn't touching, that the throttle body was basically shut all the way, but it was still running because the ICV was unplugged. Now, with an OBD2 car like this, being that it's a 2000, the ICV is a 3-wire ICV. The ICV in all OBD1 cars is a 2-wire ICV, where in the car that this came off of, it would have been mounted here where I put this block off plate, because when I was running the car stock, not turbo, this ICV was still functioning properly with the OBD2 ECU. But now that I'm converted over, I had to repin 2 spots at the ECU, and this ICV was no longer good. So I left it unplugged. Well, the issue was, even though it was unplugged, it was still stuck open. So I was still getting a massive air draw, and I was not able to change my mechanical idle. what I did was I took the ICV off the bottom of the throttle body. I put a flat metal gasket out of a soda can in it just to basically block all the airflow off to here. So what happened was, once I did that and I tried to start the car would not start, which is actually what I wanted. So the next thing was to adjust the screw. Now what I'm fighting right now is, if I adjust the idle down to a good idle, like say 950, while the car's hot, it will idle properly. But when I go to crank it, it sputters and I have to give it gas. If I adjust the idle up enough for it to idle cold, when it heats up, I'm around 1500. Now, that's not a huge issue, but it's an issue that we definitely want to solve, and that's probably going to get solved in the tune. Yeah. So once we get the mechanical idle working properly, and also now I can remove this plate and put a 2-wire ICV in, which also will help with some of that idle issue. The only reason I did not go ahead and buy one is I've heard horrible things about aftermarket ICVs. Same with most aftermarket parts. Honda made them best, and most people like to stick with Honda. But the problem is if I go buy one at the junkyard, I'm buying a 20-something-year-old working part. So it could go out the next day after I bolt it on. And we just don't want that. Lastly, you can see my bumper has this little gap. It's about a finger width. The only issue with that is right here is my U-shaped pipe for my intercooler. Right through here. It just needs to be cut down a bit. The only reason I've not cut it down is because it has a bead rolled on the intercooler pipe. So the bead goes into the silicone coupling and the clamp goes behind the bead, which keeps the pipe from blowing off during boost. A bead roller on Amazon's only like $50. I don't know anybody around here that does bead rolling, so soon I'll probably do that. I'll cut my pipe down shorter, I'll roll a bead on it, and I'll be able to move that in and tuck the bumper up. Next problem I had was my emulator and my tuning. So I have the emulator tucked into here. I've notched the case. I got my USB cord to my Snake emulator. That's the wideband reading going to the ECU, so I can see it on my laptop. And it's my jumper harness. Now, the day that I put the emulator in, it's just male pins plugged into a female socket that HA Motorsports soldered in for me. Being that the pin was in a loose hole, I was already concerned about it, but the day I put it in, I threw a base map, and I'm not super familiar with tuning, but I know the basics. I threw a base map on it, I cranked the motor, and it started right up. So I cut it off. I scheduled my tune for the following day. The guy went to remote tune it, so data log was non-existent. And even though it said that the emulator was connecting, it was only because the emulator was connecting from my laptop to the emulator. Like, we weren't actually talking to the ECU. We were just talking between the laptop and the emulator. So what ended up solving that, I spent about all day messing with it, and finally I broke out the solder iron and I soldered each leg of the male pin into the 28-pin socket. The good thing about that is I was heating the socket, not the board. Now, it's extremely sketchy to solder on these boards, and I would not suggest doing it unless you have a lot of soldering experience, or if you just absolutely cannot find somebody to do it. But HA Motorsports, you can send them their stuff and they will solder it for you. I think it's only like $60-$70. And like I said, if you're not really familiar with it, I would not do it. Now, I've been soldering for probably 15 years. So I grabbed the flux, I smeared flux in all my socket holes. I had the torch set at about 325 to 350, maybe 350. I would heat each leg of the male pin. It was very difficult to get in there. And then I would strike the solder, like if this was the pin and this was the socket. I would put the iron on it here, and I would strike the solder across until I saw it start to melt. Then I would force solder into the joint, and I would move the torch down to touch the socket and that. Now, because there was flux in this hole, it takes all this solder and it sucks it in tightly and makes a nice joint. You want to make sure you let things cool. You want to make sure your torch is actually kind of hot, because it's the same concept with welding. If your torch is just like medium hot, you're going to hold this on here forever to get it hot enough for everything to melt in. And same with welding. Like if you're on a medium heat, then you're going to end up just creating this massive heat affected zone on the circuit board, on the pipe you're welding, whatever. So you're really better to go hot and work fast. So heat this up fast, the flux will draw the solder in, pull off. I found that when I was doing that, none of the components were even very warm to the touch. Well, after that, I immediately had a perfect connection. I rescheduled my tune for the following day. Bam. Tuner uploaded the map via TeamView onto my laptop from his. And then we were good to go. I hit some highway pulls. We did plenty of driving. I'm at like 11 to 12.3 AFR in boost, which is great. We got plenty of fuel in boost. I got a good idle. So I will definitely show y'all some data log videos. I'm going to do some highway pulls here soon at night and during the day, you know, just some stuff so y'all can see the car. Y'all can hear the wastegate let off. It's pretty crazy. I got a two-step too, but the car was like super loud, sounded great with the open down pipe. Still sounds good with the Apexi exhaust, but like I was explaining, until I get that section cut out with the cat, I'm not going to have the flow and the quick spool that I had with the open down pipe. I mean, it was to the point where really with the open down pipe, when I was in the neighborhood, if I barely pressed the gas, like you could hear the turbo start winding up. So I'm gonna unbolt the exhaust when I do the highway pull videos, just so y'all can hear the turbo spool and you can hear the sound when it pops. I'm pretty sure we were shooting some flames under the car. I had a lot of soot on the oil pan just when I would hit my 6,000 rev limiter. With this motor being stock, you might think, oh, well, I drive my Civic, you know, way out to the red all the time. But when you're boosting, it's a lot different. You're putting a lot more heat in the motor. And the lower ends, like the bearings and stuff in these cars, are just, you know, stock. They don't like those high revs. Also with the head, with everything being stock, it really wouldn't be great to be pushing it out this far. Got my Bosch oil pressure gauge I've showed y'all before. I'm at like 80 pounds of oil pressure at a cold start. Like kind of just floats between this range. Once it heats up, I still set it close to 30, and then I go on up as I hit the gas. So this motor is nice and healthy. We've got plenty of good oil pressure. I think this car is going to do great at 5-6 pounds until I decide to pull the motor and build it. So yeah, the next video will just be showing y'all some videos of how it's running.